Hello and welcome. My name is Moronta. I'm the president of the SGA at the Lake Lona campus here at Valencia. And this is my lovely co-host, Brett.
Hey guys, nice to meet you. I'm a wellness ambassador at the Winter Park campus, and welcome to the third installment of the Freeish Conversations at Valencia College.
For any of our new viewers, Freeish is a conjunction of conversations that tackles the social issues presented in our community in regards to race and assumptions that some of us aren't free. Today's discussion is going to be focused on what what it is to be an ally and what you can do to support this movement. To start us off, we're going to introduce our lovely panelists, Director of Student Development, Charlie Esmeger.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. Nice to have you here.
Nice to have you as well. It's nice to be had. Nice to be had. You guys have been doing an amazing job, and I'm happy to be able to support.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Next, we are going to introduce the Executive Dean of the Ponciana campus, Dr. Jennifer Roberson.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here today.
Right.
And then we also have Barry Congressi, who is the coordinator of student development.
Yes, thanks for having me here. I appreciate getting to join the conversation.
And we also have Quinton Neal from the other side of the United States, joining us from South Puget Sound Community College. He's the director of the Diversity Inclusion Office. Welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Thank you, guys. So we want to be talking about what it means to be an ally and allyship during today's conversation. So to define it, allyship is the practice of emphasizing social justice, inclusion, and human rights by members of an in-group to advance the interests of an oppressed or marginalized out-group. So it's a part of the anti-oppression or anti-racist conversation, which puts us into the social justice theory and ideal conversation. So we want to remember that allyship is a verb, not a noun. So we need to take intentional action to support and facilitate the voice of the systematically oppressed. So there's a definition, and being an ally, we shouldn't just use that as a title because it requires action. And so I'm going to open up some of the questions for you guys in regards to that. I'll start with Dr. Robertson. What does it mean to you to be an ally in this movement? Or could you maybe define in your own words allyship first?
Yes, thanks, Brett. So when I first heard the word ally, of course, I think of countries that are being allies for one another. But to me, it's a much deeper partnership. It goes deeper than advocacy of a specific issue. Allyship to me means that you're willing to stand by someone shoulder to shoulder, united in a cause, regardless if that cause has impacted you directly. So, for example, for me as a white female, I can't say I know what it means to be Black in America, but I can seek out information, make friends, partner with colleagues that they can educate me so I can try to understand the experiences of others. And unfortunately, there's a lot of individuals who can't see other perspectives and they're unwilling to even try. Their belief system is very strong. So our work as allies is really try to break down those barriers. And unfortunately, sometimes that means creating divides between even family and friends. But to me, true allyship means staying the course even when things get difficult.
Agreed. I can speak from personal experience from being a white male. I have no idea personally, nor will I ever get the exact perspective. But like you said, educating yourself, I feel like that is where anybody can start to be an ally so that we are on the same page. Charlie, can I ask you to define allyship in your own words and how people can be allies in the movement?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Dr. Robertson, actually, I want to pick up right where you left off at. I love that, the fact that you stressed the idea of education. And then I would actually couple that with education without the expectation of understanding, right? Like when we consistently talk about these multiple identities and understanding that people hold a variety of multiple identities in relation to themselves and how they see themselves in the world. I see at times there seems to be this expectation, whether that's personal, one's own personal expectation, or maybe kind of a social expectation, that because I'm educating myself, I now understand. You may not, right? Like you may read all the books and attend all the conferences and do all of these things in pursuit of being, and kind of to your point, Brett, in answering the question, in pursuit of being an ally, but you may never get to the point where you truly understand, right? And to me, I think an ally, kind of understands that, right? Like this may not, you may not end where you start, you may not end where you think you thought you were going to at the beginning of this process of being an ally. It's more about the journey and not necessarily about the destination. And as well, to Dr. Roberts' point, it's being able to stand shoulder to shoulder. I once had somebody sit down with me, and I might be taking a little bit of thunder on this, and the people who know me have heard me say this before, but I once had somebody sit down with me and tell me that they don't need an ally, they need an accomplice. And that to me meant a lot, because at the end of the day, to that verb versus noun, ally sounds great when I'm having a conversation telling you about all the things I've been a part of. An accomplice means you can call me and expect to get a voice on the other end of that phone, or somebody to sit down with you and have a conversation, or just be there to listen to what's going on. Again, without the expectation of necessarily understanding, just to say that I'm here. So when you ask me about what I look at for allyship, that's what I look at, is just that, somebody who is genuinely connected to this process, not that kind of false or generic push forward with this expectation that I'm going to find something out new and brave and different. I just care about somebody else, and I'm going to connect to that person I care about and roll with them on that.
Charlie, you say that, and I honestly feel that, because I feel like allyship is not only you being a part of the movement, it's also being personally connected to the community. And when you say that you need someone that answers the call on the other side when you call, that's really deep, because that's something that comes into your life every day, that you want to have that person that understands you and that knows everything you're going through. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Barry, can I get your definition of allyship and maybe some actions that an ally can take to be a part of the movement?
So I think a big part of the allyship piece, you already done a great job of touching on between Dr. Ensminger and Dr. Robertson. I think that it really is putting skin in the game, so to say, and being the one who's in that fight. And even when the fight gets rough, still being in there and standing ground and saying, I'm not leaving, I'm going to be a part of this, because I recognize that things that are happening are wrong and they need to change. It happens on so many fronts. So I really think, being an ally, it truly does come down to that, more than words, but the actions that are behind it. A piece of it, I think, that I find in terms of things you can do, a lot of times we see, the people who are against the movements are almost like this faceless mass sometimes. It becomes very difficult to think, well, how do I go up against that? And I think one of the big misnomers is thinking that the way to face it is by going against these strangers and trying to change their minds, where it's more about taking the personal relationships that you have and spreading the knowledge that you've learned and helping others to understand that what's going on. So an example that I would give is I can connect to friends and to family and explain the perspectives and the things that I know. And as they kind of see the perspectives they may not have noticed before, then they can share those to their connections and so on and so forth. And it spreads like a spider web from whoever's the ally at the center who's really utilizing their voice. It will take a very long time for me to reach somebody who's on the other side of the United States and change their mind. But through some degrees of separation, there is a chance that along the way it can happen. It just takes that continued effort over time.
Excellent. I completely resonate with what you're saying. In your own personal community that you have, that's where you have the action. And that even just conversations with your friends and family, which are the most difficult, I would say, because they're not strangers. They're people that you value their opinion, but you feel like you guys don't agree on some things. That's the most challenging for me specifically in waking up to this movement. And it's also the most painful because you realize that they're not seeing the same thing as you. And how could they not? And then, like I said, I'm just waking up. So people are coming into this knowledge at all different points. And I think that the conversations, like you said, Barry, are so pivotal in people's understanding. I wonder if Quinton, is there any other actions, other than conversation? Because I know a lot of people are tired of hearing conversation as like an answer for this. Keeping in mind, it's always education is helpful, but Quinton, are there any other actions or any other ways to be an ally that you would mention?
Yeah, so I want to really unpack the allyship and accomplice thing, right? So that we can understand the temperature of maybe where you see yourself, right? So when we think about allyship is the engagement of wanting to engage in activism against whatever underrepresented group you're trying to advocate for, right? And really be alongside them like we've all agreed on. And what it means to be an accomplice means you're actually going to stand with them to dismantle those oppressive structures, right? And so we have to, I think, for folks who don't identify within a particular underrepresented group, you have to figure out where you lie. And it's okay to be honest about that, right? Where I'm like, I'm not an accomplice yet, but I'm an ally because I'm trying to figure out how this all works. And I think we have to hold ourselves to that, right? So what does it mean to be a white person wanting to really get in there and do the work? Well, allyship means, okay, let me try to engage in activism in some way to understand, which is meaning that I'm not actually putting a labor on that group. I'm doing it myself. By the time I get the understanding and the tools, I can move somewhat into an accomplice framework to really be able to dismantle those structures, right? And so what does that mean? Dismantling means using your privilege to basically make sure that that particular individual or group of folks are being heard and represented by using your privilege. Like, what does it mean to use your white privilege? What it means to be a male in a group talking about women, right? As a collective, right? What does that mean? What does it mean to be a gay male and hearing men in general talk about women, right? It's just so very intersectional. So I think what I would focus on from my perspective is figuring out where your temperature is and not jumping too quickly into it, but mostly trying to figure out that you are signing up to do the work and figuring out where you are, not putting the labor on other people to do it for you, but making sure that you are doing the work yourself. So you have to check in with yourself. And, it's interesting because I was listening to a podcast and something that I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but he was also a Black queer individual. And he said that particularly the times we're in, right, the racial tensions that are, emotions are high. And he said, it's interesting because when I ask white folks, how do you feel? It seems as though that they tend to click into this, well, I think, and it's like, no, wait a minute. I need you to tap into like, how do you feel? Because we get very analytical about our thinking. Instead of saying, no, this makes me feel uncomfortable. It makes me feel like I don't know what to do. And that's okay. Like that's a step, right? Into figuring out where to navigate. So I think just taking that little tidbit into like how we think about being an ally versus an accomplice, people of all underrepresented groups want people to be an accomplice to advocate and really dismantle oppressive structures. But I think individuals have to be honest where they lie. Like right now, I'm in an allyship space and I need to get to an accomplice, but I need to do the work to get there, right? But I'm not putting the labor on the individuals or the group to do it for me. So I just wanted to kind of flesh that out contextually to really hopefully make it a little bit more simple and maybe food for thought, so to speak. So,
Quinn, I'd like to jump in because I have a similar path to make it even simpler. I feel like, you know, one of the most important steps is self-awareness. So if you can get people to the point where they are aware of either their own racist language or actions or thoughts, and it could be something so flippant that they don't even realize it, or if, you know, if they are a very open individual, self-aware in the terms of being thoughtful about it. So for example, my background's in international education, and my entire career, I've always been focused on, you know, bridging cultural divides and trying to teach people to be accepting of other cultures and nationalities and politics, all of those things. What I realized is I really was so focused outside of our borders. So being invited to this panel made me realize that I haven't been focused within our borders, you know, within the structures of our society that does disadvantage many different populations, you know, from, you mentioned like women and the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter and the LGBTQ community. So I think, you know, one of the most important things is having that self-awareness. It goes back to what Charlie was saying about, of course, and I mentioned earlier about education, but it is a step beyond that, and really coming to grips with your own self and being realistic about your maybe downfalls and not meeting the challenges, but at that same tone also being ready to take on the challenge if you are ready for that.
Definitely, I totally agree with you. Piggyback out of something you guys were saying, out of what you guys were saying about talking to people about the whole issue about having to tell family how you feel about the actual movement and making things maybe uncomfortable for them, but it's a talk that is necessary for us to have to move on. I want to ask Queen specifically, and then I will move on to any of you, to all of you. How can people who do not self-identify as Black become allies to the movement? Like, what is your opinion on that? Like, what do you think is a good way for people to become allies?
There's a lot, you know, and I think, first of all, and I think for me, it's interesting because I just came from a panel from my own institution, as Charlie knows, about what does it mean institutionally, what are some oppressive things that we're still operating in, and when it comes to policy and hiring practices, and, you know, and I was on that panel, and I put myself on the line to tell the truth, but, you know, I'm unapologetic about it. But I think what folks that don't identify as Black can do, and I've seen this happen, is you can't take anything personal. You just cannot take anything personal. To give Black folks the space to be angry, and also give them the space to speak. It's also important to hear all Black voices in the movement, not just one group. But I also think it's important for folks that don't really understand to figure out, where do you lie on, how do you show up in your activism? Like, I think that's something to really think about. It's like, so how do you show up? You know, when you're in meetings, when you're in groups with friends, like I just don't tolerate stuff. Like I just call, like, that's just how I was brought up because my family is from the South. So we just get straight to it. But I also have been brought up with a lot of activist individuals around. So it was just very second nature to me. So I think it's important for us to really start by calling things out. Or we could say calling people into the conversation that might feel uncomfortable for them as it looks like calling them out. Um, and what does that look like? I think you have to do it in a way that for people that are in that space trying to receive it, I think it's just really important for us to really look at um, where do you lie on the meter? And I go to mostly right now, because I'm talking mostly about race, you know, but I think from a racial perspective, like white identified as well as Black folks, is this, you know, the 8 white identities, which really shows you a meter of where do you lie on this meter of, are you still in white supremacy? Are you trying to get to, are you still operating white privilege? You know, and how do you get to being a white abolitionist, right? How do you get to a place to really get to wanting to dismantle, as we would say, the master's house, right? So that's one. I think for people of color that don't identify as Black, I think this is the time for you to really think a little bit about how much knowledge do you really have to know about that particular group. And that also goes as well with folks who identify as white. So that's kind of where I'm operating in right now, because one thing that I'm starting to realize with a lot of the conversations is that people are so quick to really want to have very nuanced conversations, but no one's still understanding the foundational understanding of anything. And it's like, oh yeah, you know, what it means to be Black and non-binary and all these things. But I'm like, you still don't even understand what white supremacy is. Like, we need to start right there before we get to a very complex conversation. It's like school. It's like you went from first grade, jump to 12th. No, that's not how that works in this process. So I think learning needs to really happen, but is another component to it. And I know I'm kind of all over, but it's just my brain moving pretty quickly in my head. But hopefully that gives you some ideas, some contextualization around what can we do? Like Jennifer said, you know, you need to be self-aware. You do. You need to be very much self-aware. And that's number one. You can't take things personal. And to be honest, I'm putting it out there. Charlie know I'm very honest about things. I was on a panel at the institution, and I was in a meeting like 2 days later and found out that there are some white folks that thought I was an angry Black person, you know? And they're like, yeah, you know, Q. I'm like, I know what I signed up for, you know? The truth has to be told, you know? People of color, particularly Black folks, we're not here to massage anybody's crazy. We're not here to massage and deal with your, like, we're not here to really have to check on your emotions, because we have to already live this on an everyday basis. And it's an honor, right, when we do kind of get in that mode of wanting to really check in on your emotions. Like, we don't have to. So I think it's just really important. Like, and it goes for the other side is when we're talking about the conversation between folks who identify as male and female. Like, it's not women's job to check in on how men feel if they did something. It's not their job to do that. So I just want us to think about what it looks like from a very racial perspective. So that's a little bit.
Charlie, I was actually just gonna go up to you. He says he was talking about educating the people, and you don't go from first grade to 12th grade. And I feel like that's something you mentioned at the start about having this whole process. Rome wasn't built in a day, and educating people is one of the first steps that we should take into consideration when tackling this issue. So how do you feel about how can people that want to be allies become allies in this movement?
So thank you for that Perry, and I apologize if it seems like Quinn and I have done this a couple times before. We have, so it's an ongoing conversation for a few years now. So I want to pick up on some of that and answer your question, Angel. So I love when you said be self-aware. I would add be honest. Self-awareness and honesty. Sometimes it seems like they're two things that live two peas in the same pod. I don't know if that's true, and maybe I'm just speaking from my own perch, my own perspective. I think people strive for self-awareness, but without an understanding of like that true honesty, often don't accomplish what it is that they're after. I love the fact that you said don't take things personal. Ironically enough, like again, Quinn and I have had similar experiences in the same institution, where calling somebody out, erupts into this. It goes from being this conversation to this more very personal defensive posturing, where where the person can't see past the fact that they think that they're this accusation over their head, when you're simply just calling a situation what it is or how you see it. And I would add to that to tell the truth, right? Something that's easily said, right? Tell the truth is often just not done, especially in just kind of pairing again off of when we talk about that idea between ally and being an accomplice, and being able to deconstruct certain systems inside of your spaces based off of your privilege. Being able to tell the truth isn't always a glorious position to be in. I think as scholar practitioners in this room, that's something that we often run across when we are diving into our own research, and you start investigating and doing that critical analysis and realize like, wait, this isn't what I thought it was. And being able to voice that. Kind of getting back, because I can get a little far out there, but getting back to the question at hand, I don't know if it's necessarily for folks to identify. I don't need folks to identify me to recognize me, or to identify with me to recognize me. You don't have to, and I kind of lean back on this, you really don't have to know my path to understand the group that I am in and the situations that plague us. The cycle of poverty isn't to be argued based off of, my interaction within it or that other person's interaction within it. This is something that is proven. We've seen it time and time again. Just recognize that. You don't have to be a part of the movement to recognize the social injustices that are taking place and the, really just the issues, right? Like that we see in society every day with being a person of color. As a light-skinned Black man, I often am confused with being Latino or this or that, and which is fine. But at the end of the day, I still fit inside of a marginalized and underrepresented population that is disadvantaged almost at every corner. And I get it, right? Like the idea of like, how are you here if you're disadvantaged? I know that conversation too. But at the end of the day, I don't need those folks to identify with me so much. It's just to recognize this is the system that we are currently in, recognize their place within it, recognize where they can make a change and impact that change, and then really work on that idea of being that ally. This movement is just that, but it's also a marathon, not a race. And so there's no like, you got to wake up tomorrow and figure out what you got to do and do it really well, right? Like it's dedicating yourself to the recognition, maybe in the pursuit of identity, so that one day we can sit down at a table and have a conversation like that, a challenging conversation where truths can be told, and people can put out how they actually perceive things. Believe it or not all of us, perceive situations to be the same all the time, and put out how they see it and have a real honest, intellectual, emotional conversation where we're not pulling away from that table feeling like somebody came at me sideways. That would kind of be my address on that.
That's a great answer. Guys, I want to inform you that we're a little bit under the time limit, so I'm gonna quickly go ahead and ask Barry for his take on this question. And I want to see what's your opinion.
Perfect. So I actually want to could jump back into where Charlie was and talking about the honesty and the truth part of it. One thing that I really come to terms with, especially over the course of the last few months, is the misinformation campaigns that exist are just phenomenally loud on all sides. And I think one of the hardest pieces, especially in the conversations that I've had, have been where people aren't critical of what they hear and they accept what they hear the first time as the truth. And so they don't go to look for more and dive deeper. And I think that's, you almost end up in this echo chamber of, you and your friends all listen to the same thing or watch the same thing, you hear the same things, and so you accept that as your truth. And it becomes very difficult to break that until somebody comes into your circle who interrupts the flow of that conversation and says, well, wait a minute, have you looked at this perspective over here? And I find that conversation is happening less and less frequently when it needs to happen, especially as we've kind of entered this virtual space where we're all siloed in our homes more often than not. Having those kind of free-flowing conversations has become even more difficult. So it really takes that person who's the ally to really kind of branch out and go out of their way to try to have those conversations, to bring that perspective. So I'll say, I try to avoid Facebook at all costs, but I find that when I go on Facebook, it's walls of misinformation on every side. And I see people who I look at them and I think, I know that you are an intelligent person. I know you're smart. I've had conversations with you. How is this the perspective that you have? And I'll have a side conversation with them, and it'll sometimes take hours of debating back and forth before it clicks that maybe they don't know everything. And it takes so long to break that down because people think they understand and they accept that as their truth. And so a lot of times that truth and honesty isn't as clearly defined as what we think it is. So I think that's kind of a hard piece to really look at is the conversations are just so difficult to have when there's so much misinformation. And it almost takes an organized front. I look at, the Black Lives Matter movement and, even this series, Freeish, an organized movement to introduce information and perspectives to people to kind of break that norm that they're in. And I think that's just paramount, is so vital to changing the mindsets, especially now more than ever. So that's my piece I'd like to add to that.
Oh, that's a great answer. Jennifer, do you have anything to add to that?
So I would just add, of course, I echo all of the sentiments of the panel. I would just say, for the last question, in terms of what can you do as an ally, I think it's important to find something that you feel comfortable with. Not everybody needs to be marching in the street. You might want to sew masks that are branded. You might want to make phone calls. You might want to just speak up when you normally would stay silent. So I think it's really important that you find a way to contribute to this cause, to these conversations, but in a way that you feel comfortable with, that fits your personality, that fits your talents even. If you want to build a website or, create a Facebook page that has more realistic information. So I think that would be one of the things that I wanted to mention to the group.
Definitely. I thank you so much for your answer. I want to thank everyone in this panel. You guys have been amazing. Brett, if you want to come on and say thank you as well, it's so welcome.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you guys for bringing self-awareness to even us in the panel, and especially at Valencia College with the Freeish conversations. We've had a couple in the summer, and we're going to have more in the fall. So please stay tuned if this conversation is something that you're interested in and you're looking to be an ally. Thank you guys very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.